I am of the non controversial opinion that LeBron James is on steroids. And when I say steroids, I'm referring to performance enhancing drugs generally. Of course, this topic has been covered by many fine films on YouTube. And what we're going to do now is continue on that path using statistics to show that LeBron is too much of an outlier. So, this PowerPoint is titled The Best Ever at Steroids. And of course, this is as alleged by me. On this next slide, we have three slots from the Ringer 100. So, the Ringer 100 is our rankings for the NBA basketball players. We have Jason Tatum at 10, Victor Wembanyama at 11, and then at 12 is LeBron James. Now, one of these is not like the others, and of course, that is LeBron James, because here it shows that LeBron is age 40 and entering his 21st season. Now, keep in mind that this is a Ringer 100 for the 2024-2025 season. So some of the seasons may be off, but the point here is that LeBron James is well beyond what should be the twilight of his career, and yet he's still ranked among the elite NBA players. All right, so what I've done is I've had ChatGPT analyze stats for several star players that were drafted near when LeBron James was, and we just have some graphs to go over. And on this next slide, I just have some screenshots of the statistics to show that we have compiled a bunch of numbers, and here are the results. On this next slide, I have a table. And so here we have the peer group that I analyzed. So we have Dwyane Wade, we have Amari Stoudemire, Carmelo Anthony, Darren Williams, LeBron James, Kris Paul, and Dwight Howard. Of these peers, only Kris Paul still is playing, and he hasn't played as many years as LeBron because he was drafted after LeBron. Both LeBron and Kris Paul are 40. And so LeBron was drafted in 2003, Kris Paul in 2005. Of course, the difference here is that LeBron James is still a top 25 player in the league. So he's still considered a star or a superstar. And Kris Paul is nowhere near that echelon. When we look at Dwyane Wade, he is 3 years older than LeBron. He was drafted in the same draft class along with Carmelo Anthony, who is 41. Dwyane Wade only lasted 16 years in the league, Carmelo Anthony 19 years, and LeBron James is about to enter his 23rd year. Amari Stoudemire was drafted the year before LeBron in 2002. His last year was 2016. He played 14 years in the league. The lowest number in this group is Darren Williams, who is age 41. He was a rookie in 2005, so after LeBron, and he only lasted until 2017 for 12 years in the league, which is still fairly good. It's still a decent tenure. It's still a decent career in the NBA. So these are LeBron's peers. Of course, he has outlasted them all, other than Kris Paul. But Kris Paul started later than LeBron. So on this next slide, we have a bar graph showing a LeBron James at the very, very top with 59,041 total career minutes played in the regular season. The next closest is Kris Paul at 45,608 minutes. And then we have Carmelo Anthony right near that at 44,034 minutes. The point here being that LeBron James is an outlier among outlier. Keep in mind that all of these peers listed were at one time elite players in this league. At the very bottom, we have Amari Stoudemire, whose career was plagued by injuries. He has just over 26,000. And then we have Darren Williams at nearly 29,000 and Dwyane Wade coming in at the third lowest at nearly 36,000. All right, so what I've done is I've separated these peers into two groups. And so we are just going to use the two groups to compare with LeBron using a line graph. So here in group one, we have Dwyane Wade, Carmelo Anthony, and Amari Stoudemire. And then we have LeBron. LeBron, of course, is the line that ends up at the very top at the right side of the graph. And then we have Dwyane Wade and Carmelo Anthony and Amari. And Amari's career ends fairly abruptly. We see him in 2010 still averaging 25 points per game. And from there, we have a sharp decline until he was averaging 6 points a game in 2016, and by after that, he was out of the league. Now, for Carmelo and Dwyane Wade, their careers extended much further. We see they hit a peak and they hovered around that peak, but then they slowly start to decline after their looks like their 2012 NBA season, and then they're still averaging 20 points per game, but they quickly slip out of that. Actually, Carmelo Anthony stayed at 20 points per game or above for quite a while, but we see Dwyane Wade start to dip and Carmelo still dipping. And then by 2019, both have a sharp decline and then are out of the league in short order. Dwyane Wade is out of the league by 2020. Carmelo Anthony follows in 2021. In 2020, LeBron James averages 25 points. And then in 2021, he actually gets to near a career high at over 30 points per game, which is incredible when you consider that LeBron was in his late 30s at the time this happened. And even more impressive when you look at his peers, Dwyane Wade and Carmelo Anthony, nowhere close to this. And that's not to say that they needed to average as many points as LeBron. Of course, there's a reason LeBron is considered one of the greatest players in the game. So his peak and his where he starts to well, he hasn't really started to decline, but in his where he starts to plateau in the just above the 25 points per game, it's still going to be higher than the other players because they just never reached LeBron's level. But we don't see that parallel decline with LeBron's numbers. And that shows again in this next graph where we have group 2 with Dwight Howard, Darren Williams, and Chris Paul. And so here we can see Darren Williams' career ended in 2016. He was at his peak, and then right at looks like 2011, he started to decline fairly quickly. And then we see Chris Paul and Dwight Howard hold on a little longer. And Chris Paul actually tapers off nicely. So his decline isn't as sharp, but we still do see a steady decline over the years to where he's averaging less than 15 points per game in his 2024 season. Dwight had a quick decline after his 2017 season, where he was only averaging 16 points per game then. But from there, it was only 2 seasons before he was under 10 points per game. And we've covered LeBron. So again, it's not, and by the way, these lines are all points per game. Of course, Chris Paul was more of a playmaker. Darren Williams was similarly a playmaker, but he also was a good scorer. But even at their scoring peaks, right? If we just look at LeBron's versus theirs, their scoring peaks, although lower, taper off. LeBron's scoring peaks that are higher, even if we just look at LeBron's peaks, they still don't taper off with that same type of decline. LeBron reaches 25 points and just does not fall below that. And this, of course, is over the course of a 22-year career. And what's especially strange is that after the 2020 season, LeBron James actually goes above 30 points again. And the last time he hit 30 points, it looks like he hit 30 points in 2007. And then he was actually above 30 points in 2005, early on in his career. It's his third year in his career. He hit over 30 points per game. So in this next slide, we have LeBron. Again, we can see him at the top line, and then we have the average of all of his peers. And so we can see here what I was talking about is that the peers, they reach a peak, they hold that peak for a few years, and then we start to see a gradual decline, which gets sharper and sharper. Note that there is some turbulence in the averages because some of the players actually retire, so that changes the averaging. But we do see that general decline. We see a sharp uptick, but then we see that decline continue. And then for LeBron, we've covered him. He's just not, we see the start to decline, but then he picks back up at the 2020 season. So next I looked at Kobe Bryant. And Kobe, of course, is another player that is considered among the greats. And Kobe got off to a slower start in his career, so he was still developing early on. But we see that by year 5, Kobe is right there with LeBron. And in fact, in season 10, Kobe reaches 35 points per game, well above LeBron. And then so through seasons 10 through 14, Kobe is ahead. And then we see LeBron's points per game actually go ahead. And then from there, the next two seasons, Kobe and LeBron are neck and neck. But then Kobe has a sharp decline. And then he's able to get up above 20 points one more time before his last season, where he finished off at 17 points per game. And as we've covered, LeBron just never goes below 25 points. And then his career goes on. So keep in mind that Kobe and LeBron's careers had some overlap, but they were in different eras and their primes were in different years. But with this graph, we are looking at the start of their careers to the end of their careers. So this really is a comparison. Even though they're different eras, we at least have the years aligned. And Kobe ends in year 20, and LeBron is still going into his 23rd season, and he's averaging above 25 points per game. And of course, Kobe even had what was it? He went to Germany for a there was some kind of therapy that he underwent in Germany. My point there being, Kobe did everything he could to extend his career, and he ended up at 48,637 minutes. LeBron again at 59,441 minutes currently. All right, on this next graph, we have LeBron and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, obviously two completely different eras, but I wanted to include Kareem because he was the points record holder for the longest time until LeBron broke his record. And so we can see that Kareem's career starts off on fire, and by year 3, he's averaging 35 points per game. But from there, it is mostly downhill, and his points per game just tapers off until we get to the 17th year of his career, and then everything falls apart. And then by the end of his career in year 20, he's down to 10 points per game. And we've covered LeBron. Again, you start to see that divergence at year 17 really takes effect. Of course, even before that, we saw a gulf in the previous 3 years where their careers really went on separate paths. And then what I thought was especially interesting was comparing LeBron James and Karl Malone. So here we can see their careers are very similar. The upward trajectory is nearly the same. Karl Malone is 2 shades below LeBron, but then he catches up and actually has a higher points per game than LeBron for a few seasons. LeBron takes over. Then there's a couple of points where we see them matching or Karl pull ahead, but they're very, very close. And then we get to, it looks like year 13, and this is where Karl starts to descend, and LeBron maintains his above 25 points per game average. Karl Malone gets to 25 points per game one more time in season 15, and from there it is quickly downhill until his final season, which is year 19 for Karl, where he's averaging about 13 points per game. And of course, as we know, what's curious is you see this last line from the year 18 in Karl's career to year 19, and it's just a sharp, sharp decline. And if we look at this graph, LeBron goes in the exact opposite direction, and then he continues on, and of course, he is still playing. All right, so I have a few final thoughts and bullet points, so let's go ahead and go over these. One thing that I think is particularly unfair is when we see the users of performance-enhancing drugs prosper. Some are able to extract, of course, riches from their careers, depending on what sport they're in. And then we also have fond memories of them winning. I think to the UFC, some fighters fight others who are known to be on steroids, and they lose, and that is how they are remembered. When I think of John Jones and Daniel Cormier and Cody Garbrandt and TJ Dillashaw, there we have known steroid users in John Jones and TJ Dillashaw, and they come away with the victories. And it's unknown at what time and point they were on steroids. My general point here is that we do see some performance-enhancing drug users prosper from their use, and some are even remembered fondly. So let's think about Alex Rodriguez, right? He's now been a guest shark on Shark Tank. He's now a co-owner of the Minnesota Timberwolves. And is this all possible without him being able to roll over the millions he made playing baseball where he was caught cheating? So we see so many cheaters who are able to escape, and some who are able to propel even further after their playing careers are over. Of course, it doesn't turn out this way for everyone. When we look at Lance Armstrong, he has got a very much a negative stigma, but not everybody has that same stigma. And one of the bullet point I wanted to add is that going through LeBron's peers, it doesn't mean that any of his peers weren't also on steroids, performance enhancing drugs. But we do see LeBron being an outlier among outliers. And I can't emphasize enough that all of those peers that we looked at, they were at one point in time superstars, elite players in the NBA, and they all tapered off well before LeBron. And this is a topic worth covering and worth simply asking about. At this point, it gets to the level of absurdity when we see LeBron James holding up the all-time scoring record. He's holding up a trophy or whatever it is. He's having the occasion commemorated at center court, and he's being celebrated for it. But it's worth asking at this point. Okay, you're at year whatever. You have this longevity. You've been able to score this many points. How exactly are you doing this when no one else is, at this point able to come close because you've passed Kareem and you've got so many years ahead in your career? So it's one thing to be an outlier in some respects, but when we keep seeing this, it does raise questions that should be covered and yet are not. And of course, we've seen this play out before. And I think what's important is what I have on this next slide is that we need to discuss the steroid usage while the player is playing. So it's not that they don't get away with finishing their career and then it's looked back on. It needs to happen while they're playing. This needs to be an ongoing discussion and not something that is overlooked or is talked around, or we only hear subtle points that move closer to insinuating there's drug use. It needs to be openly discussed. And if there is no drug usage, then the player will be able to withstand that. But if there is, then they should be associated with that, and they should have that scarlet letter for having used steroids and cheated. And keep in mind that when we have steroid users that remain playing athletics and are taking up a spot on the field, that is displacing someone else. So someone else could be in that spot and they're not in that spot because another player is cheating. And so it just moves down the line, right? There wouldn't be another LeBron, but there could be another player that is playing that would be surpassing LeBron if it were not for steroid use. And it is impressive in a way if you think about it, because as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't mean that none of the peer group wasn't also using steroids at some point in time. So LeBron being where he is, even with steroid use, even with performance enhancing drugs, it's still impressive because among the different NBA players that have used steroids at some point in time, LeBron is still far beyond any longevity anybody else has been able to accomplish. And his and the records he's racking up, again, so far above anyone else. We've seen Joakim Noah get penalized by the NBA for steroid usage, and he didn't last that long. I mean, not compared to LeBron, but just in general, he didn't even last so long in the NBA. So the NBA is a league dominated by athleticism, which makes this even more impressive because this isn't a non-athletic sport or a non-athletic position that LeBron is playing. Now, obviously now he's taking off a lot on the defensive side, so we don't see that level of stardom from LeBron. But you're not going to be able to average 25 points per game in the NBA unless you're able to keep up with the athleticism that's required. And that's not what we see from several other sports. So with baseball and with being a quarterback in football, you can get away with being unathletic. You cannot get away with being unathletic in the NBA with respect to what LeBron is doing, right? You wouldn't be able to average 25 points per game if you were unathletic. Whereas with other sports, potentially golf, potentially baseball, and others, then yes, you can get away with it. But LeBron is still able to keep it up. But when we look at the statistics, that's why I wanted to cover these graphs. And that's why I wanted to just compare him to his peers, compare him to other all time greats. We looked at Kobe Bryant, we looked at Karl Malone, we looked at Kareem, different eras, different positions, but still, these players were at the very, very top and they had longevity, right? We didn't see as many injuries. We saw Karl Malone play through a lot. Of course, Kobe played through a lot. And I don't know a lot about Kareem, but his career was very long for a someone who is playing center and that tall. We don't see centers lasting nearly as long, especially from that era and as tall as Kareem was. And we've looked at that peer group, which included guards and forwards and centers. And of course, LeBron is just outlasting all of them. So all of the signs point to performance enhancing drug usage. He's just too much of an outlier.